Hello and welcome to the Startup Operator podcast. I'm Roshan Karyappa. On this episode of the Engineering Manager series, Augustus and I spoke to Deepti Agrawal, who is Director Engineering at Flipkart. Deepti has been with Flipkart for almost a decade now, and she has seen Flipkart's rise and she has seen the scale of Flipkart from very close quarters. So on this episode, she spoke about how Flipkart has systems and processes in place to ensure that quality or end user experience does not suffer while they are being innovative and moving really fast. So this is a fascinating conversation and a lot of insights for anyone who's interested in understanding how to build for scale. I really hope you like it. Hey Dipti, welcome to the Startup Operator podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Hello, hey everyone.
So, Deepti, for our audience, it would be really great if you could talk about your experience and how the journey of the last 10-15 years has been.
Sure, sure. So I started my journey with company called SMS Gupshup. This was something that was incubated in the same campus that I was part of, and I just happened to join because a lot of my seniors were working there, and that's how I got into this whole engineering world. Um, I've worked in this startup for about 3 years, and then I had moved back to Delhi, which was my hometown. And incidentally, the Delhi office shut down after a while. It was this recession period, 2009, I guess. And then I ended up joining another startup. And this was into email analytics. It was a four people startup that we just got into. And there I was the second or third, I don't remember, but yeah, in a four people startup, it was. So the people at that time, all four were handling all sorts of roles, starting with arranging our own laptops from Nehru Place to, looking at the HR, accounting, payroll, and everything other than the engineering work. So yeah, we built a product, but yeah, investors decided to shut down the team in India, and then I moved to yet another startup. This was into SEM, search engine marketing, and so this was the time when actually the founder asked that, okay. I actually asked the founder, ki, bhai, whatever startup I work in, it just shuts down. I'm a little skeptical about joining a startup again. And I was asked that, okay, should you be skeptical or should I be skeptical about hiring you? So yeah, that was how I got into this domain of search engine marketing. This was a firm called Clickable, and it got acquired. And post that, I moved into Flipkart. So Flipkart was the first company outside of NC, as in like after moving back to Delhi. This was the company that I had started applying to because I wanted to move to Bangalore. So my family, as in my brother, was here, and we thought, okay, we should all move together, and that's how I started applying to companies in Bangalore. Flipkart was the first company that offered at that point in time. It was not that famous as it is now. But yeah, I went ahead with joining Flipkart, and I believe that has been one of the best decisions of my life.
Right.
Yeah, I've been with
And
Flipkart for about 9, 10 years
10 years
now.
back? Oh, okay. So this was
Yeah, 9 and
2010-11.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. So you worked in different types of startups, right? You worked at really early stage startups, and of course, I mean, Flipkart is still considered a startup in some sense, right? So, what varies with respect to engineering at these different sizes of the organization?
I think obviously the scale is one part. The way you run your day-to-day processes is the other. Like I mentioned in the second startup that I talked about, the four people group that we had, we would just go ahead and directly check in code and deploy to production. There was no process really. Okay, when to release, how to release, and so on. It was pretty much the same thing when I joined Flipkart as well. We would deploy multiple times in a day. Of course, there were more approvals and such. There were people who were doing the code reviews for you at least. It has changed quite a bit. We have more elaborate processes now in terms of like not really the complete CI/CD thing that we would ideally want to have, but yeah, it's more organized. There are release cycles, there are deploy cycles, and so on. So yeah, I mean, the the risk element that you have, or the developer productivity versus say the whole process security, all of that is one factor which is different depending on the scale of the startup.
Right.
And the other thing is the support or the things that are taken care of. So for instance, in the second startup, like I mentioned, there were things like payroll and arranging hardware also that we were looking at. Whereas most of those things are taken care of when you are in a bigger firm.
Right.
So yeah, you can focus on code and your systems rather than all the peripheral stuff.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I guess when you're starting out earlier, you have really nothing to use, right? There are very few users or customers and so on. So you can kind of risk, that whole fail fast or move fast, break things kind of a credo. But then soon as you have some base of users and customers, it becomes very critical to focus on all of the scalability, security aspects and so on. And you've seen that growth with Flipkart itself, right? So what are some of these processes that startups should prioritize for their engineering once they go from, let's say, 10 members in their engineering team to a few hundreds as they scale?
I think one of the very important things to have is HA. And when I say HA, it's high availability of people and not just systems, which means that anything that you are building, that logic or that thought process should not be sitting in your head. It should be in some document. It might not be a very fancy document, but it needs to be there for, like, if you are on leave, if you're not available, people should not be calling you at 3 a.m. They should have a way to figure out how to come out of any issue, or if they just want to extend something and let's say you are on a longer leave. I think that is one very important thing that I've learned the hard way. And I'm definitely trying to make sure that in all my teams, I'm creating HA for people in the team.
Very interesting. It's like no single point of failure in humans.
Yeah.
Interesting.
This episode is brought to you by Mulya. You want to move fast? Sure. But without breaking things? Now that's a hard ask. The thing is, once you have some base of users and customers, you just cannot afford to risk quality. So how do the likes of Cred, Swiggy and Curefit, some of India's fastest growing startups, ship at lightning pace and delight their users and customers? Simple, they're working with Mulya as a strategic quality partner. Mulya is India's most talented and passionate community of testers. They've helped prevent thousands of bugs and regression issues. So as a CTO or a product owner, if you want to reduce tech debt, especially while you scale, do check out Mulya.com. I've interviewed Mulya's founder and CEO Pradeep on the podcast earlier, and we spoke about how startups can improve quality while scaling and things to that effect. You should definitely check it out. I'll link to it in the description below. Now back to your regular programming.
So how do you this is actually a very interesting topic. I think we can delve a little further here. I think when you look at systems, right, when we architect systems, I remember the old days where we had to take care of a lot of things, right? And a lot of those things nowadays are available. For example, you can now use open source, whether it's orchestration tools or whatever, right? Long back, we had to write a lot of those scripting assets. Yeah. How do you push that same culture down to the next level of leaders and the next level of people, right? When they hire their team, how do you kind of set up that high availability? Like, is it through processes, or is it through the way you hire itself? Do you look for multiple skill sets so that somebody can come and take that place when somebody else isn't there, who owns that thing? or do you like work on duplicate roles? I'm very interested to learn more about what you mean by higher availability.
So usually, so let's say I'll talk about one example of one of the teams that I was part of. It was the catalog engineering team, which was about how do you, I mean, all the processes and systems around ingestion of product data. It could be getting data into the system. It could be doing a lot of image processing, text processing, getting meaning or information out of the data that sellers and retailers are uploading, and then massaging it and getting it into a format that is servable for the customers, right? So now, in this whole ecosystem, there were some 30 odd services, 25 to 30 odd services, and I had a team of 25 people, right? So what we created was a mesh or a graph, actually. So like 2 or 3 people owning 2 or 3 services and having those overlaps, right? So one person owning 2, 3 services, each service owned by 2, 3 people, right? And then having a pyramid structure in terms of the roles that the people play. So let's say for every SD1 in the team, you have a SD2 or a 3 who is mentoring that person, who's equally accountable for ensuring that that person is meeting their goals and doing things the right way. So overall, one part is the process, the other is the mindset that you get or create in people, like why they should do it and what is the benefit they are getting out of it. So every time, let's say people start getting comfortable in that role, you rotate people, right? You say that, okay, you've been handling the service for 6 months now, let's get you into this new service. So for them also, there is some new learning for them. Let's say different services will probably be following different paradigms. There's something new for people also to learn. And there's also, I mean, someone recently shared a video where it's called Weber's Law. And it's like the attention span or the interest level decays at a logarithmic scale. So like you have a very high interest when you just join or start something new, and the interest starts tapering after a while or plateaus out after a while, right? So when you enter into that stage that, okay, you are feeling saturated or your learnings are plateaued out, you get into something new. So organically the HA is created because there are more people who will keep getting the context and they'll keep learning new things. So people also remain excited and engaged with the team, and at the same time they feel that, okay, yeah, the person or the manager is invested into their growth, so hence they are creating those opportunities for them as well.
Right. Yeah, I think you briefly touched upon it. I am really curious about how engineering teams are structured in Flipkart. I mean, do you have like different people looking at different categories? I mean, just curious from a very non-engineer perspective.
So the very obvious separation is that, okay, there is a business team that looks at specific categories that you just talked about, right? So there is a mobiles team and there's an electronics team and lifestyle team and so on. So those are the business BD people, as we call them, business development people. Then there are engineering teams. So we call it one tech team. So that comprises of engineering, product, design, operations. I mean, everything to do with building systems and scaling them, right? So all these teams, product design, engineering, QA, all of those teams collaborate very, very closely with each other. And in terms of structure, we have these BUs. So there would be one BU that would look at, say, the discovery side. We call it shopping experience team. There's one team that looks at payments. The consumer finance team. There is another team that looks at central platforms, which is the team that I'm part of. So yeah, there are different business units based on the coherence of the functions that they are owning. And within a BU, there are, again, multiple teams. So there are directors, engineering managers, depending on the size of the team, there are different leaders at different levels.
Right. Yeah, it seems like a fairly complex structure, right? Because obviously, I mean, Flipkart is a large organization now, and at the same time, you have the pressure to run as fast or as be as nimble as a startup, right? So, how do you get these various teams to collaborate on their work, and such that people are not stepping on each other's toes, but at the same time, they're not doing their own stuff, or they're really siloed from the collective goal as such. I mean, it must be a very complex thing in some sense, right?
Um, there is complexity and there is also simplicity. So the simplicity comes from the fact that over time, after a lot of iterations, we have tried to simplify the whole process of defining what each team should be doing. So we call it the OKR process. I think it's a fairly standard industry term also. So we define the objectives and key results once in 6 months, and it starts from the CEO level. So let's say the CEO would define what are the goals, L0 goals and objectives for the company. Then each BU would take L1 level action items or objectives for their own BUs. And then we translate it down for like each manager and each specific team, right? So those are, let's say, things like the top-down strategic goals or business initiatives that we want to invest in. Similarly, there is a bottoms-up process where each team comes up with the kind of tech innovations or tech investments that they would like to work on, and that also feeds into the prioritization process. And then there are business objectives or dependencies that come from other teams. So these three main things: top-down strategic initiatives, bottoms-up tech innovations, and business deliverables from other teams, which we are dependencies for. All of this feeds into this whole mixer where we put in everything along with the decision criteria, like how do we decide that this project makes the cut and this project falls below the cut line. So there are metrics that we try to define, like, okay, for this particular initiative, this is the GMV impact, this is the productivity improvement impact, and so on. And based on all these formulae and metrics and everything, we try to identify that, okay, these are the set of things that we are signing up for. And then we publish all our OKRs for the next 6 months. This is the ideal world. In a realistic world, after the first 3 months of the OKR, some change in the ecosystem will happen. For instance, this COVID thing happened in March last year. All our OKRs went for a toss. We dropped everything and we started focusing on, okay, how do we enable essentials on Flipkart, right? So yeah, all those changes in the ecosystem will keep happening. The crux here is that we should be able to evolve and change our strategy as and when we need to. So the processes help us in streamlining all these activities. But yeah, at the same time, whenever we need to change, the processes also allow us to, change our course and correct it wherever required.
Right. So the other question I have is, with as many engineers as Flipkart has, right? I mean, it must be interesting to think about every problem as something that we should build ourselves, right? I mean, how do you make the choice between building for something versus just integrating an available service in the market versus maybe acquiring a small team that's working on this particular challenge or whatever, right? So how do you do that decision between build, integrate, and acquire?
So incidentally, just before this call, I was doing a business case for a build versus buy decision.
Okay.
And a lot of it is driven by the ROI analysis. So again, we use maths and science here. We come up with, okay, if we were to build it in-house, what is the cost? And we include things like opportunity cost. Like if we build it in-house, it will take us 6 months versus if we adopt a ready-made solution, it will help us go to market in 1 month. So all of those costs are included. We try to put a dollar number to it. We try to put a dollar number to things like if you're going with a solution which is tried and tested, maybe we can get to say 99.9% uptime on this particular feature, versus if we build it in-house, it will be an incremental journey and we'll start with maybe 95% uptime. What is the cost of downtime here, right? And we again try to put a dollar number there. And then we try to see that, okay, in the long term, is all of this dollar number adding up to what cost it will translate to for us if we were to buy that solution? Or does it make more sense to hire a team and build it, and then we call it core context exercise. So what is core to us? What is context for us? Which is something which is not our core IP, or something which we might not benefit from by implementing it ourselves, versus what is something that we can just get some off the shelf solution and go to market with. So yeah, all of this is based on a lot of number crunching, ROI analysis, and then finally that call is taken.
Right. So as I'm hearing about all the processes and metrics and systems you have in place, right? I mean, on the one hand, it's amazing that you're building so much of predictability in the whole function as such, right? But on the other hand, I'm also thinking, like, if you have to sort of take a step back and escape this day-to-day operational need, right? On a daily basis, you have 5 things to do, and your teams are engaged in that. Um, how do you create these opportunities for people to sort of think out of the box and maybe discover something serendipitously, or like come up with a ingenious solution for something that may not be a pressing need at this point of time? Just wondering how you create those opportunities.
Yeah, so here again, what we have is a tech innovation bucket. Again, you might think that okay, everything is being pinned down to that being a process. So in this case, it's not really a process, but a mindset, I would say. Like a lot of good solutions have come out of what we call as 20% projects. It's not really an official program where we like, unlike a few companies which do it as an official program. So here we encourage people to invest time into what they would like to build, and they can use up to 20% of their time in these kind of things. We also have an internal patent program where people submit ideas. We call it Project 1K was one of these initiatives. We also keep running a lot of hackathons once in a while. This is again just to create that forum or create that channel where people can um, uh, take their ideas to some logical point. And then if we see that okay, this is an idea which is really going to add a lot of value, and we see value in taking it to production, we then make it part of our OKRs. So in a recent exercise that we did, we almost took 1/3 of our ideas that came through these channels and made those candidates for productionization.
Wow. I was going to ask you that actually. So, any ideas from any of these hackathons and so on that have actually made it to the end user experience, and something that we as consumers would have experienced? Any of those in the last 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things that you see on the app today started with hackathon ideas only. I could probably name a few. Can't recall anything on the top of my head, but yeah, a lot of those ideas. Actually, let's say this. Um we had an internal dashboard where we could see all the um, what all systems exist, what all packages are deployed on what servers, and this was something that was a need also, and this was something that we implemented in one of the hackathons. So I implemented this along with a bunch of PSCs, and this was something that we were using till quite some time before we moved into a different way of doing deployments.
Right.
So yeah, a lot of other like consumer facing products also would be there, where
So
people.
how do you so let's say as a new engineer, as someone who's joined the team recently, uh, do I have like some sort of autonomy in terms of like suggesting something new? You just mentioned that there are some features or some parts of the product which came as a result of these hackathons.
Right.
So what does that process look like? Let's say I'm someone who joined like maybe a year ago, and I now have some idea of how it works.
Mhm.
Like can I just create a prototype and show it, or is there some process to be followed? How does it work in your setup?
So yeah, if you have a really good idea, you can discuss it with your manager and take it to the right forum. So for instance, if that idea is something in the discovery world. So you pitch that idea to the discovery team that, okay, this is something that we think it would be a good value add, and you should, if you see merit in it, do you want to make it part of your OKR process? Or in some cases, going ahead and implementing a POC and showing the value out of it. Right? Or there are different forums, like I just mentioned, right? There are this project 1K where you can submit an idea. It could be a hackathon. So in different teams, hackathons happen at different times. So you can submit your ideas or you can present it in one of the hackathons. All those channels exist, those forums exist. And in case, let's say there isn't one around the corner, say the project, say that forum is not accepting new ideas at this point, you always have a way to discuss your idea with your manager or the right team that it belongs to.
Okay.
Yeah, no one will tell you that, okay, don't think about this idea. They'll always encourage you to take it forward.
Got it. And I think that brings me to like the next part. I think as a new engineer, so how long would it take right in Flipkart in the way you structure teams? I think one thing I'm seeing constantly is you mentioning OKRs and some sort of alignment to the overall goals, which is actually very nice, because usually bring that alignment to business engineering teams is something which is hard to do. And I think the way of mentioning it itself makes me feel like everyone is very tethered to these OKR processes. How does a new engineer like get onboarded? Does it take a lot of time? Because it seems like it's very process heavy. At least that's my impression right now.
Actually, I would like to correct myself. It's not as process heavy as I think it is sounding right now.
Oh, I
So
think you're really good at answering questions.
so it's actually not so process heavy. At least you don't feel that the process is a burden. It feels like it's a aid. It's something that helps streamline things, especially at the rate at which we are growing. If you don't have some of these processes, you would probably just be running in different directions. Yeah, from that perspective, some of these OKRs and other processes help us streamline a lot of our day-to-day work. And regarding your first question around
Employee
new
onboarding,
joiner
engineering onboarding.
onboarding, so every time a new person um, takes on or signs on for this adventure with us, we assign that person a buddy or someone whom they can reach out to even before joining. And for the next 4 to 6 weeks, that buddy is expected to help you ramp up. They are expected to help you discover the right documentation, help you set up your local environment, get up to speed with all these processes that I talked about. So yeah, the buddy program is there. And I think within 4 to 6 weeks is what people usually do get ramped up. We don't have any formal trainings or anything. It's learning on the job. And usually 4 to 6 weeks is what I've seen people getting fairly comfortable.
Right. Okay, just so that people listening don't get scared, thinking that I mean, such a sorted out engineering process and everything is in place and perfect and everything. So why don't you talk about a few challenges that you're solving right now, some high level challenges that you're solving right now? So and then maybe we could delve deeper into a few of those. Yeah.
Sure. So I could talk about my team in a little more detail. So I'm part of the Central Platforms group, and this is the team that, as the name suggests, builds central platforms. So Flipkart has its own set of data centers, and we are trying to make our central platforms as close to a public cloud offering as we can. So in a public cloud offering, you would see people when they go to this kind of offering, they expect certain things for granted, that, okay, there would be some way to spin up an instance, there would be some way to spin up a new database, a SQL store, a non-SQL store, a queue, so all of these things are taken for granted, right? And Flipkart having its own stack, we don't have all these managed offerings available out of the box. So my team right now is investing into building all of these managed offerings. so that all these business teams, they don't have to invest into the infra and platform concerns, but they can focus on writing actual business logic or the app level code that they actually own, right? So those are the set of um, initiatives that I'm working on. Regarding the challenges, a lot of these managed offerings are built on top of existing open source stacks. And a lot of these open source stacks start breaking at Flipkart scale, or the scale or the use cases for which we use some of these offerings. And in a lot of cases, we go ahead and fix or address that problem in the open source stack and contribute it back to the community. So yeah, from that perspective, while those challenges exist, there is also a way to get around those challenges and in the process create value for the bigger community as well.
Very interesting. I think I at a scale like Flipkart, it makes a lot of sense to explore some sort of should I call it decentralization, or at least offsetting that whole problem to a different team. That's pretty interesting.
But are you also leasing out these services? Like no, right? I mean,
Not yet.
for
I mean,
now, at this point of time, I think just being
yeah,
able to
it's
deploy
just
for yourself. Yeah.
yeah. So that's the case with a lot of the services that we have externalized later. So things like, say, our payments system, similarly, e-cart for that matter. So a lot of these initiatives that started out with a different need, and we saw that, okay, this is something that can be externalized and used by other folks in the same space. Those are the things that we have externalized at later points in time.
Yeah.
So the Flipkart cloud platform right now, I wouldn't say is in a stage where we can lease it out to other players. But yeah, definitely the constructs that we are building would be equivalent to any public cloud offering.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty amazing, right? I mean, if you look at Flipkart, I mean, it pretty much started the e-commerce wave in India in some sense, and you have so much of institutional knowledge and experience and everything. So, offering these packaged application services, whatever it is, whether it's like payments or the cloud services, etc. I mean, all of these could definitely be possible, right? I mean, it's yeah, it's pretty interesting. So. A more fundamental question, right? Which is like, what makes a great engineer in your opinion?
Um, okay, there are a couple of things. One is getting things done. I think either way, if you tell me that you are blocked and this is the problem, I would not label you as a great engineer. But if you tell me that, okay, this is the problem and these are XYZ solutions, and I think this is the approach we should take, that is what I would say makes a great engineer, where you don't take those problems as excuses, but you take those problems as learning opportunities where you figure out, explore, read up, research, talk to your peers, stakeholders, and figure out ways to get things done, right? Because uh, no problem is like unsolvable unless it is NP hard. But yeah, it's something that really um, sets an engineer apart. That okay, this is a great engineer and this is a okayish engineer, where you are taking problems head on and really coming up with a solution mindset rather than a problem mindset.
Right. So, lately we are seeing that engineers are tasked with plenty of other sort of cross functional attributes, right? I mean, they have to think from a customer mindset, user mindset, they have to have a little bit of product thinking also, and so on and so forth. All these things which were at the edges are becoming a little more prominent and integral to whatever they do right now, right? So what are those things that could be useful for an engineer to make him or her a more well-rounded engineer, right? And how should one go about developing all these things?
Sure. So I think uh, an engineer, if they actually use the product that they're building, that is where they get most amount of learnings from. Um, we have this process called dog fooding, where once a product is ready to be productionized, we release it on an internal environment, and we call it initially the fish fooding environment and then the dog fooding environment, where you release the feature to a subset of the users within the company, collect early feedback, and then you are also like, if you are working on it, you are expected to use it as a customer and see like some of the things might not be very obvious to you when you are working as a developer, but when you use the feature as a customer, right, a lot of those things surface when you see not just, I mean, when you see your family or people around you using the product, a lot of things that you took for granted, but surface in those kind of interactions. And people are really encouraged to go through that dog fooding feedback and learn from it. Similarly, on the platform side, so this was probably more applicable for a applications world where you release a dog fooding Android app or a iOS app. On the platform side, which is the team I'm part of, we do a similar thing where we release a playground release, right? So when we are ready with the offering, we release it as a as what we call as a beta or a playground release, and then peer teams. So let's say if I am in a I'm launching a product for say managed SQL offering, I would ask someone from a peer team, say a messaging team or a different peer team, to go and follow the getting started guide of my earlier first product and see whether it is comprehensive enough, whether they are able to onboard without any glitches, whether they see any obvious misses in the onboarding process. So that is also something that helps in getting early feedback, as well as ensuring that we are addressing some obvious cases upfront.
So when you work for like such a prominent consumer company, right? I always imagine, these awkward, weird conversations you might have with your family and so on and so forth, right? I mean, like let's say just before your big billion day or whatever, I mean, people might talk to you, or let's say some order didn't go through, etc., etc., and you might, have to deal with these conversations, right? So. I'd be remiss not to ask you about this whole Big Billion Day phenomena, because it's such a phenomena, right, that Flipkart pioneered. From an engineering perspective, what really goes into that? I mean, are you guys like ready with all of your pizza and everything, waiting to do a night out at the office?
Yeah, it actually used to be the case where we would be in office at a stretch for at least 2 or 3 days, the first 2 or 3 days of Big Billion Days. We would have our mattresses there, our clothes there, and so on. But now I would say BBD is more closer to BAU. It's just another sale. The first I think 3 or 4 BBDs was really a lot of action, and yeah, I mean the seriousness attached with this annual event is still there. We still have a lot of those say BBD preparedness tasks, as we call it, before every sale event. But yeah, the mania associated with BBD is kind of going or tapering now.
Right. Okay. That's an interesting transition, I suppose. Uh, so, in your time at Flipkart, right? I mean, you've transitioned from being an engineer to an engineering manager, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about, what are those skills that engineers have to develop in order to make it to that next level, and as an engineering manager, how should you go about doing your work, right? I mean, so what differentiates you from what you were 10 years back, something like that.
Sure. So when I actually transitioned from a engineer to an engineering manager, at least my thought process at that point in time was that, okay, if I'm in a engineering manager role, I'll still get to experience this side where I'm influencing what we should do, and strategy, direction, and so on. And I'll also get to code once in a while. But if I continue in a IC role, I'll not get the exposure that a manager has. And that was one reason why I actually made that switch of moving into a manager role. But yeah, if I have to call out one thing that is different between a engineer and an engineering manager, is that as a EM, you are in the business of getting things done by others, you don't necessarily have to do everything yourself. So as an engineer, I had that, there's that kida is there that, okay, if that something is lying unfinished and I've assigned it to someone, if it is not getting done, just go ahead and do it yourself, right? So I had that kind of mindset, and it took a lot of time and patience to get out of that mindset that, okay, it's okay to let the team make that mistake or to delay a certain deliverable. You don't have to jump in and always tell that, okay, go and maybe solve the problem this way, or in some cases going ahead and checking in your code yourself that, okay, this is just a small thing, let me just get it done. So that instinct will be there, that because you are still an engineer, that instinct will be there ki, okay, chota sa kaam hai, let me just do it. But you have to consciously step away and let your team do it.
Right.
And that is a journey that you have to, it's a incremental thing. It will not come naturally in the very first year. It will take some time, but yeah, once you uh, get into that mode and you see your team excelling and your team doing what you would have done anyway, I think that gives you a lot of satisfaction as well.
Right. So
Very interesting.
yeah,
So
go
I
ahead,
had a
Augustus.
question. So this is now I'm just moving the conversation a little bit towards the code base and the tech side of things. Like in a company like Flipkart, right, or maybe in your team or overall as a company, how do you kind of balance out innovation and new features or any of that stuff, and then also balance things like your the debt you have accumulated technically, or maybe refactoring parts of the code base, or maybe like redoing a microservice? How do you kind of balance that in your roadmap? Would love to like hear about it.
Sure. So we have this interesting way of labeling projects. It has changed now, but I'll talk about what was being followed for a fairly long time. So it was called G0 to G6, so G1, G2, G3, G6, and so on. So those were goals that were defined, and the priority, ordinal priority. So let's say at a G0 level, there would be a bunch of initiatives, similarly G1 and so on. And what it really meant was that anything which is at a G1 level um, should not conflict with anything which is at a G0 level. So if there is any, say, prioritization that has to be done, anything in a G0 bucket will always trump anything which is in a G1 bucket and so on. Right? And then we realized that, okay, all of this is there, but then what about tech excellence, right? All the things that you talked about, tech innovation, tech debt removal, and so on. So we created a G-1 bucket that, okay, system resiliency, predictability, productivity, all of those will always be G-1. And again, we realized that, okay, if we keep, if that is the case, then we'll always have so many things in G-1 bucket that nothing will get done from the business initiatives perspective. So then we said that, okay, we'll have those buckets, but then we'll also limit the bandwidth that we allocate to each Gn, right? So let's say G-1 bucket will take, say, 35 to 40% max and not more than that. Similarly, other buckets. So yeah, all of this got incrementally defined, evolved over a period of time. And yeah, now we are at a level where we are consciously creating bandwidth for what we call as G-1. And we are no longer calling it G-1, we are calling it tech excellence. But yeah, we set aside some percentage of our bandwidth for these sort of things.
Got it.
Right. So I had a question around remote work, right? I mean, now we've been working remotely for almost a year. I think we're coming up on a year now since last March, right? How has remote changed engineering, and what are some different things that have come into for over the last year that we've been working in this sort of a context for you and your team?
Um, I think one good thing that has happened is people turn up for meetings on time. In fact, it was very rare to see people joining a minute or two before time earlier, because people had to walk across towers and floors to reach the meeting room. So that part definitely has helped. Um, I mean, that discipline has come in. We appreciate each other's time a lot more. Productivity in some sense has improved because at least in Bangalore, you don't spend 2 hours in a traffic jam now. But on the other hand, that people connect that we used to have, or those whiteboard sessions, brainstorming sessions, those were definitely much more effective in a non-work from home situation, where you just, if you have to, reach to a conclusion, or you have to solve a problem, you would just get the right people into a room, walk through the different solutions on a whiteboard. I think that is something that is missing, and it takes longer to converge now because you have to set up time with people. You have to see whether they might be busy in cooking, or they might be busy in other things. So yeah, that has introduced some bit of inertia, I would say. But overall, if you have to balance it out, in the longer term, before this whole COVID thing, I had hardly ever taken a work from home. But now I realize that even after office opens, maybe at least 30-40% of the times I would probably work from home. So it has both merits and demerits.
Right. Yeah, so Deepti, this has been a fascinating conversation. I think we covered like a wide breadth of topics related to engineering, and so this was amazing. Thanks so much for your time again, and I think our audience will really appreciate all of your insights.
Thanks for. In fact, it was a good retrospective for me also. Thanks for scheduling this. It was interesting to just recall what the journey has been so far. So yeah, thanks for that.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked this episode, then don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite platform and share this episode with all of your fellow startup operators. Also, follow the Startup Operator on LinkedIn and Twitter for more updates. Stay safe, take care, and see you soon on a brand new episode of the Startup Operator.